Hello and welcome to episode number 22 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chelney, and oh man, do we have a show for you today. Before we get started, please make sure to follow the podcast on Twitter at Chel Squared and on Facebook at Chel Squared for more hot takes, news about future guests, poll questions, and a whole lot more. Please rate the show on iTunes if you enjoy listening. It means a lot to me, and every time you either like the show on SoundCloud or give it a rating on iTunes, a puppy gets a hug from its owner. I don't make the rules, just making sure you are in the know. We have a ton to get to this week, a ton. Once again, we are recording this week's episode on Wednesday as opposed to Thursday due to scheduling. If you missed it, big news today. The Pittsburgh Penguins have traded Carl Hagelin, Rangers legend Carl Hagelin in my heart, to the LA Kings for Tanner Pearson. Both players have been, pretty just terrible this season. No sugarcoating here. They've been pretty bad. Pearson has no goals and 1 assist in 17 games this season after scoring at least 40 points the past 2 years. Hagelin, meanwhile, has a singular goal and 2 assists in 16 games. He scored 31 points in 81 games with Pittsburgh last season. Hagelin, by the way, makes $4 million this season, while Pearson makes $3.75 million. So the Penguins retain $250,000 of Hagelin's salary so that each team would end up with the same cap commitment before the trade. We'll break down what this trade means for both teams. We're also going to go around the league and talk dominant first lines, which is the poll question this week. By the way, if you want to vote on the poll, it's at Twitter, on Twitter at Chel Squared. If you respond to the tweet, the best ones also might make the show, so make sure to reply to the poll as well. Does Boston have the most dominant first line in the NHL? Maybe Chicago? Maybe Florida even? We'll talk about that coming up. Also, by the way, in case you haven't noticed, Tom Wilson got his suspension reduced to 14 games by a third-party arbitrator, which means he played last night against Minnesota. He scored, and in the process, he almost decapitated Devan Dubnyk while crashing the net. I mean, this is what you're gonna get out of Tom Wilson, whether you like it or not. It was tough. Dubnyk took a little bit to get up, and it didn't look good. I mean, it's your first game back, and you're already taking shots at goalies. I mean, he was crashing the net, so there's a little bit of a pass there, but still pretty not good, especially in your first game back after missing a lot of games for headhunting there. We'll take a look at JVR and how his return not only affects the Philadelphia Flyers, but more importantly, our fantasy teams. I'm mostly kidding. I did pick him up in my fantasy team, so hopefully he returns on Thursday for my fantasy team. But more importantly, for himself and for his team. Obviously, I'm mostly kidding. My fantasy hockey team is, in my head, the most important thing in the world. But for reality's sake, obviously, it's not. Both Stanley Cup teams are struggling this season, which is surprising. The Caps and the Golden Knights are both currently out of a playoff spot. The Caps are 8-6-3, so they're over 500, while the Knights are second to dead last in the West, above only the Kings with a 7-10-1 record. The Kings, by the way, 5-11-1, and are a complete and utter dumpster fire. We'll get into their struggles as we move along. Also, by the way, remember a few weeks ago when New Jersey tweeted at me? They were undefeated at the time. And I tweeted out, not to them, just kind of indirectly, that all New York sports teams are bad. So who are New York sports fans going to turn to? It was a joke tweet. I tweeted that out a few weeks ago, and they found it somehow. I didn't mention them. I didn't tag them. I didn't do anything. They found that tweet, and they quote tweeted it with a thinking emoji. And then half of the state was in my mentions, talking about how New Jersey was this great team. They were undefeated at the time. Since then, they've been losing pretty much every game. They won last night against Pittsburgh, but they are now dead last in the Eastern Conference. I'm just saying, this could change in 2 weeks. It's the middle of November, but I'm just saying, New Jersey. I'm just saying. Here with me for the show to talk about everything I just listed off and more is NHL writer for TheScore, John Matisz. John, how's it going?
Good, man. That was quite the intro. You nailed on a bunch of topics there. What's up?
Absolutely. Well, we have to do a rundown, you know what I mean, before the show actually starts.
Of course.
We got to make sure people that are listening know what we're going to be talking about. We can't just, out of the blue, just start rambling about certain topics. So you wrote an article today for TheScore about this Penguins and Kings deal. You included some analytics, which I thought was pretty cool. I love how analytics are becoming more and more prevalent in media, not just not just Twitter charts or not just the analytics savvy people, but also it's becoming more and more prevalent in print and in popular media as well. So I really appreciate you putting the analytics in your article. So talk to me about your first impressions of this trade and what you thought from both teams.
Well, I guess my very first reaction was, okay, this is an interesting trade. Let me look at how these guys have played this season. I know that they hadn't played well, but I mean, like, they've literally done nothing. So it's a little underwhelming in terms of an actual impact trade, because maybe Tanner Pearson at his best versus Carl Hagelin at his best, like, that's an actual trade that is going to garner a lot of attention and is going to make a big impact. But like, the way that things have gone, it's almost like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, the Penguins, according to Jim Rutherford and the way that he's been talking the last week, are just not supporting their stars the way that they should be. And he's come out and said, this is unacceptable. We have this window here where we have Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and a couple of other guys that we don't worry about because they're stars, but the guys that we're worrying about right now that are ruining this window to win are the secondary guys. So it was sort of maybe coming down the pipe from Pittsburgh's angle, and then obviously LA with them being in shambles really is a way to put it. Last in the entire league right now in points, and terrible underlying numbers. A super slow team. They had just got embarrassed by the Maple Leafs the night before. So, like, it's one of those trades where there were two teams that wanted to make a change, and they used a piece of their current roster that is just totally underwhelming, and they found a willing partner, because both of these guys could use a change of scenery, and both teams could use a little new blood. So you see Tanner Pearson going to Pittsburgh, and maybe getting a fresh start there, because like I said off the top, him at his peak is a pretty effective player. Him this year, not so much. And then Carl Hagelin, as you mentioned, Rangers legend. I actually totally forgot. I totally forgot he played for the Rangers until I was looking at his page today, just because you tend to forget where guys play. But
we haven't. We have not forgotten that. I'm a part of a couple of Facebook groups of just Rangers fans, and all of them were posting, for former Ranger Carl Hagelin got traded, even though it has nothing to do with the Rangers now. It's just kind of like, Rangers fans will never forget, even if you played a single minute, a single game for this team, we will never forget you, for better or for worse. That's just how we are.
Well, he had a hell of a rookie season for the Rangers, so I get it. There's a lot of potential there. But if we're looking at the trade and sort of its impact, I don't even know if it's really about the players. I think it's about the teams and the GMs realizing, if you just look at LA, they just fired their coach, brand new coach. A week later, there's a trade of a roster player. Is Tanner Pearson, a star? No, but he was also part of their 2014 Cup winning roster and a part of this core that's been around for ages now. So I think it's the trade itself isn't going to have this gigantic shift. It's not going to shift the Eastern and Western Conference or anything. But I think it's super fascinating how a team like LA that's falling out of favor and is sort of really losing their grip on success and relevancy. They're being proactive, maybe a little too late, but they're being proactive this season with their moves. And then Pittsburgh getting ahead of maybe any sort of disarray by saying, hey, this is unacceptable what's happened in the first month. We're in a decent spot in terms of wins and losses, but we don't want that to go down the wrong road, and we're going to make some changes. Like, I just find it interesting from a GM and personnel perspective, as opposed to the actual transaction.
So as we mentioned before earlier in the show, Pearson averaged 40 points a game for the past 2 seasons. Now he comes out, 17 games played, 0 goals, 1 assist. What have you seen out of his game that suggests he's either struggling or if there's something behind the hood, under the hood that we don't really see, but something underlying is going on? Or is this, what is the deal with Tanner Pearson and his all of a sudden inability to produce?
Well, I think a part of it is line mates. He's played in the past with Anze Kopitar, with Jeff Carter. This year he's been with lesser known teammates. And Tanner Pearson's never driven a line. Like in the NHL, there's play drivers, and then there's guys who are complimentary, and there's nothing wrong with being a complimentary NHLer, but Tanner Pearson's never been a play driver. So even though he's been on fantastic lines and had really impressive underlying numbers, if you look back and kind of sift through who he's actually played with those times where his numbers have risen to the fore, he's played with some really good centermen. So I just think that things have really soured in LA. I think that before John Stevens got fired, there was I don't know if they tuned him out, but there was an overwhelming sentiment that this just was not working. This whole Daryl Sutter and John Stevens way of playing hockey was not working anymore. And I think that trickles down to the player's psyche. And we can talk all day about is it the chicken or is it the egg? Is it the players on the team that play slowly, or is it the playing style that the coach is telling them to do, or the type of style that he wants them to play? So I just, with Tanner Pearson, I just think that he's a top 9 guy who is maybe he's not super dynamic. He's kind of a north-south guy, and he has a decent shot, and he's useful. He kills penalties. There's lots to like about him, but I don't think he's ever been a star or a fringe star. He's always been a reliable guy in this season, whether it's puck luck or just not being there mentally. It hasn't worked out as we can see with his terrible point production.
It wouldn't surprise me if Tanner Pearson would have an increase in point production now. I'm looking at dailyfaceoff.com, and as of now, they still have Crosby in the lineup, which is a question mark right now because he's being evaluated for an upper body injury. But right now, it's Tanner Pearson, Evgeny Malkin, and Patrick Hornquist on that second line. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Tanner Pearson started scoring, if and only because he's on that second line. Meanwhile, Daily Faceoff has Carl Hagelin on the third line with Mike Amadio and Trevor Lewis. So it really wouldn't surprise me on paper, at least, to see Carl Hagelin still continue to struggle offensively while Tanner Pearson finds a quote-unquote home in Pittsburgh, only because of the different setup of line mates that these two players are going to have.
Yeah, I don't know if those are official lineups. I realize that it's Daily Faceoff and they do their homework and everything, but I don't know if it's just sliding one guy into the other guy's old spot or whatnot.
Right.
But, I mean, at the end of the day, Carl Hagelin, too, he's 30 years old. The weird thing about this trade is that the 4-year gap in actual age, right? So, the Kings, the second oldest team in the whole league next to the Minnesota Wild, they get 4 years, they get a guy who's 4 years older than the player that they're shipping out. So that, to me, the fact that Carl Hagelin is a pending UFA, I'm thinking they're going to showcase him and then flip him at the deadline. Because even though Hagelin, solves their speed issue a little bit, he's one guy, he's not going to blow the doors off of the NHL and start scoring at a crazy pace and be this player that you just can't lose. I think that they're going to showcase him, and Hagelin's probably going to help to an extent, get that team moving the puck faster and playing faster. But that was one thing that when I started thinking about it longer, it's is Rob Blake just, is he just going to compile some guys that he can flip at the deadline? Because, if I'm a contending team and I have a hole on my left side or even right side, because Hagelin can play both wings, let's say on my third line, I'm a contending team, it's the deadline. Not a terrible guy to pick up at his price tag. So, I wonder if that's sort of a rental option for Rob Blake down the road.
But wouldn't Tanner Pearson be more of a profitable name to have on your roster? Even though he's signed for longer than this season, Tanner Pearson is 26, Hagelin is 30, and he, again, had 31 points last season as opposed to Pearson's 40. Wouldn't it make sense to keep Pearson and then flip him at the deadline as opposed to trading for Hagelin and then trying to find a suitor for him?
I just think that Hagelin's probably a better rental option for teams because, he's a UFA in the summer. You don't have to take a chance on him like you would with Pearson, where Pearson's not worth the money that he's making right now. I know he's not making a ton. he's producing, it's a nice contract. But if you take Hagelin for the rest of the regular season after the deadline, you're not paying him a ton, and then you say see you later in the offseason if it didn't work out. Whereas if you pick up Tanner Pearson, that's a different story. And plus, I think Hagelin can also move around the lineup a little bit more. I think he's a little more versatile. He can kill penalties. Like, if I'm a contending team, he's probably more appealing to me in a rental sense.
That makes sense, but both players aren't first-line potential, that's for sure. But these 4 first lines that I asked in the poll question, by the way, once again, if you want to vote in the poll question or reply to it, tweet me at Chel Squared. It's up there. It's up there every week. So the poll question for this week's show is, which first line is currently the most dominant in the NHL? Now, John, I'm going to read you the 4 options, but I'm not going to tell you which option got how many percentage of the votes. So because I want your response before I give out the answers here. So the 4 options were Boston with Marchand, Bergeron, and Pastrnak. You got Chicago with Alex DeBrincat, Jonathan Toews, and Patrick Kane. You got Colorado with Landeskog, McKinnon, and Rantanen. And you got St. Louis with Schwartz, O'Reilly, and Tarasenko. Which of the 4 do you think are the most dominant in the NHL?
It's kind of semantics, but if you're asking me which one I'd like to have or which one I think is the best line in hockey, it's easy. I think it's Brad Marchand, Patrice Bergeron, David Pastrnak, and I think Gabriel Landeskog, Mikko Rantanen, and Nathan McKinnon have been a nice story. I think that they are an excellent line. I think they're top 3 wherever you want to put them, but no one's touching that Boston line right now because they're absolutely dominant at 5-on-5. They have been I think they've been together for about 2 years now. And it's just, when you have a sample size like that and it never dips, it's just constant and they come at you in waves and they're very good defensively. We all know about Bergeron defensively, but Marchand and Pastrnak are actually very reliable as well. Just the versatility of that line, I can't get over it. It's one of those things where I almost don't give the other lines the time of day in this type of discussion, despite the amount of skill on, say, that Colorado line. This Boston line is head to toe dominant. I mean, give me an aspect of the game, and they excel in it. 5-on-5, and if you want to even expand this to other realms, they all play on the penalty kill. They're all on the power play. Like, that trio, the chemistry there, their ability to work off each other, their switchability, their skill level, the list is very long. And with these other lines that you mentioned, I think that there's more to pick at, more to critique. Where the Boston line, like I said, with a large sample size, so it's real. They check off every single box.
So I have to give a shout out here to @Eric Eric, who responded to the poll, and he said Mike Hoffman is on a 13 game point streak, and Dadonov's at 12, centered by Barkov. I'm thinking that line deserves to be in the mix for the most dominant line in the NHL. John, what do you think of that?
Yeah, that's fair. If we're talking about the most dominant line at this point in time, full stop on November or whatever it is, 13th or 14th. Then maybe we talk about Rantanen, McKinnon, Landeskog, and that Florida line, and maybe even the Buffalo line of Palmanville, Skinner, Eichel. But I took the question more as this far into the season, if we're thinking about the line and the way it works together. And the full package, that's sort of the way I looked at it, and I thought Boston was a shoe in there. But there's arguments for a handful of lines in terms of the flavor of the week.
No, you're absolutely right. I should have included the word overall because you got it right on the money. So there's over 130 votes in this poll. So the first option, which was Boston, got 41% of the vote. Chicago got 5% of the vote. St. Louis got 5% of the vote. Colorado was the winner with 49% of the vote. Now, I tallied up the points for each line. So right now, the Bruins combined have 68 points. You have Marchand with 20, Bergeron with 25, and Pastrnak with 23. In case my math is wrong, which could very well be the case because my major isn't math here, so I could be wrong.
Yeah.
You got the Chicago Blackhawks at 52. You have DeBrincat with 16. Taves with 14, and Kane with 22. You have You have the Avs with 69. So with that, which leads the teams, the 5 teams that we're talking about right now. The Blues with 42 and the Panthers with 46. But you're absolutely right. I think in any situation, right, the Avs are their offense is bar none top 2 the NHL. That first line is unstoppable. But overall, if you put Marchand, Bergeron, and Pastrnak in any situation, they will shut you down. And not only will they do that, they will demolish you as they go, to the other end of the ice and score a goal.
Yeah, and then when you factor in the Chara and McAvoy combination on the back end when they're healthy, that 5-man unit is just laughably good. And I saw it firsthand last year with them playing the Leafs in Toronto and being able to cover that series a little bit. And also another thing with the Colorado line is like, you got to give them credit because that Colorado forward group is so bare that, they're shouldering a lot of the load. So, I give them props for, I guess Jared Bednar, I give him props for loading up one line, not being afraid of that. And then also the players producing when, the rest of the lineup leaves a lot to be desired. Whereas, like Boston's not the deepest team, but Krejci, DeBrusk, like there's some guys that are dangerous further down the lineup. So that's also something to consider. But this Boston line, it's one of those things where it's like every night they're dominant. Like it's very rare for, like, they might get shut down in terms of points on the board, but like they're always smothering the other team. They're always playing consistently. Defensively, like if you're talking about back checking or just puck support and stuff like that. So there's so many things that work with that line that blends together and makes something pretty special.
Well, one player that definitely doesn't do all parts of the game very well is Tom Wilson, who is now back on the ice after getting his suspension cut by 6 games by a third-party arbitrator. Tom Wilson played last night in Minnesota, as we said earlier, and scored a goal and almost knocked Devin Dubnyk's head into the corner. I mean, he was skating in the boards pretty quickly, and he was pushed a little bit by the defenseman. So in terms of everything that he's done, this isn't totally on him 100% of the time, but he rammed into Devin Dubnyk en route to scoring a goal. The puck was in the net just before contact was made, so it would have been a goal anyway. But Tom Wilson, John, I feel like if Wilson has one more of those questionable hits, he's going to be gone for at least half a season next time. I mean, I don't believe he should have been let loose 6 games early to begin with. He got that, and now he's back on. But, it really worries me that Tom Wilson is truly an elbow or a bad hit away from ruining someone's career. He's a dirty player. Offensively, he's an okay player. If he wasn't as much of a dirty player as he is, then he would have been a pretty okay top 6, probably better top 9 forward. But because he's such a dirty player, I'm just very worried every time he's on the ice because of the likelihood that there might be an errant elbow or an errant cross-check or an errant whatever that might end or cut someone's career. I'm worried about that. How worried are you about Tom Wilson on the ice?
Well, it sounds like you're pretty worried. I don't stay awake at night thinking about Tom Wilson.
Well, right, for sure. But whenever he plays, it's kind of a thought in the back of my head, as and I'm sure I'm not the only one here. Whenever they play, whenever he's on the ice, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, oh boy, hopefully he doesn't headhunt somebody on this shift.
Yeah, and I'm not going to defend Tom Wilson, but I would, because I do believe that he's one egregious mistake away from getting, like, I don't know, a half a season off or something very stiff. I think that was a pretty stern warning that they gave him from the hit earlier this season, and although it got reduced, like, the original suspension was a fairly big message. So I think next time around, if it's anything substantial from Wilson, if he's doing something that's very illegal and very impactful, I think he's, for lack of a better word, pretty screwed. But I like Tom Wilson as a player when he's not doing that stuff. I think he's actually pretty he's fairly effective in that role as sort of like the third man in on a skilled line, or even at the third, the third Washington line. Like, throw him whatever right wing you want to put him on, because he has like some skill. He's got a pretty good shot. He skates well. Like, if he tones down the offside, the sort of the hits that we want out of the game, then I think he has a career here that he can extend to 10, 15 years. And he's sort of like, again, putting aside the very terrible hits that he delivers when he's playing normal hockey, he's a good player to have on the team. He's like the modern day power forward. So I don't know if I answered your question. I don't even remember what your question was, but yeah, he sort of worries me in a sense, because it seems like the message hasn't necessarily gotten through to him based on his track record and what he's said in the past. Oh, I've learned, and then he goes out and does it again. So there's a little bit of worry there, I'd say, but it's all on him now. So if it happens one more time, I think he's in for a rude awakening.
No, I totally agree. And by the way, I had a sort of question about Tom Wilson. It was more so of, what do you think about his play and the suspension being cut in almost half. You're cut by 6 games, but you hit the nail right on the head. Well, another player that is back relatively soon, I would think, is JVR, James Van Riemsdyk, on the Philadelphia Flyers. And, less so for my fantasy team and more so for the Philadelphia Flyers, he's a big addition to the team, and his scoring was very, very missed by the Flyers, and who've had a topsy-turvy kind of season. They've looked very good in some games and then have looked really bad in some other games. They've been hit with some injuries pretty hard, but now that JVR is back, it'll bolster that offense a little bit. What does JVR bring to this Flyers team that wasn't there when he's out? Obviously, besides his offense, because they only played 2 games with 1 assist, and then he got injured for a few weeks. But what does JVR bring to the ice, bring to the locker room besides the obvious here?
So James Van Riemsdyk's pretty one-dimensional, but the one dimension that he excels in, the one that he brings to the table is pretty impressive. His net front game is right up there. Even with his teammate Wayne Simmons, like, those 2 guys are probably in the conversation for best net front guy in the entire league. It's a shame that he was injured in this. I believe it was the 2nd game of the season, so he hasn't really been able to showcase himself to the Philly fans. But to give a brief scouting report, I guess he doesn't seem to care too much about his own end. Not that he's really costing the team too much. Like, he's not a liability, but wouldn't say he's a defensive stalwart. So it's the net front game. On the power play, he's phenomenal. In close, right near the net with the puck, his stick handling and his ability to roof it over goalies is right up there. And if you're talking about, JVR the person, very dedicated to his fitness, his body, what he puts into it. He's well read. Like, if I was, an NHL general manager, I'd probably seek out JVR to be on my team as a good influence. And if you can get him at a good price, I realized that the Flyers didn't, because he was a UFA and there were a lot of suitors. So, he probably got overpaid. But if you can have a guy on your team that scores 30 goals in a good season, and in a bad season scores like 20, and you put him in the right spot, and that to me is sheltered minutes on a line that's not going to get hard matched, then I think you're cooking. And I think that given the way that the Flyers are lined up, he'll probably slot in on the third line left wing, and obviously take care of business on the power play. So from covering him in Toronto, very influential in the locker room in a good way. Is like I said, a total pro, and then on the ice, a bit of a one-dimensional player. But what he excels in is goal scoring. And hey, every team needs goals, so the Flyers should be pretty pleased with him finally making his way back.
Absolutely. You can't win games without scoring goals, right? No matter how many hits you have, no matter how many posts you hit, if you don't score, you're not going to win games. The Philadelphia Flyers are 9-8-1. They are out of a playoff spot right now. Of course, it's middle of November, so this is very, very early on. We still have a lot of hockey to play, but as of right now, they are out of a playoff spot. 5-4-1 their past 10 games. They lost their last game against the Panthers. They will play tomorrow against the Devils. Right above them are the Washington Capitals, who are 8-6-3. Same amount of points. Both teams have 19 points. The Philadelphia Flyers have given up 62 goals in 18 games, which is one of the highest in the NHL, if not the highest. They're behind Vancouver. Vancouver has given up 69 goals, which is, as I've said many times before, the Vancouver Canucks do not have goaltending at all. They don't employ an NHL goaltender, but the Philadelphia Flyers are right behind them with the second most allowed goals in the NHL at 62. Their goaltending situation is bad, and I talked about this last week as well. If Philadelphia or the Penguins for what we talked about last week, if they were looking for a goaltender at the deadline, and Edmonton doesn't work whatever situation that they have going on, if they don't work it out, because they're 5-5, the Oilers are out of a playoff spot right now with they're 9-8-1. They did beat Montreal in their last game. They will play in Calgary in a couple of days here. But if they don't get their goaltending, if they don't get their team under control here, they might look to sell Cam Talbot. And if Cam Talbot is available to either the Flyers or the Penguins, that is going to be a scarier team. But for now, the Philadelphia Flyers can't keep the puck out of their own net, and they can't win every game 9-8. So that's, they do have some great offense, but they don't have, let's say, Toronto's offense, who can easily put up 6-7 goals a game when their goaltending or their defense, their lack of a defense, takes a night off. But the Washington Capitals, who are 8-6-3, out of a playoff spot right now, won the Cup last year. They're not in the playoff spot. The Vegas Golden Knights are 7-10-1 and are second to dead last in the Western Conference, only ahead of the LA Kings, who are 5-11-1. The Blues are tied with the Golden Knights with 15 points, but the Blues have 3 games in hand. They are 6-6-3. I mean, what's going on with both of these teams? Both of them were in the final. Obviously, the Capitals are doing a little bit better, but the Golden Knights have a lot of injury problems. But is there anything else going on with the Golden Knights? I mean, last season, everyone, including myself, predicted that the Golden Knights were going to be bad, and then they made the final. And now before the season, I thought they were going to be good, and now they're bad. So how do you look at the Golden Knights right now? How do you gauge this hockey team?
I think, well, you touched on it briefly there. Like, it's kind of silly and it's kind of a cop-out, but they've had Nate Schmidt sidelined with a suspension. They've had Max Pacioretty for a chunk of games on the sideline. Paul Stastny sideline. A couple other injuries that aren't coming to. I mean, Shea Theodore signs late. Like, a lot of things have gone wrong for the Vegas Golden Knights, and it's sort of the hockey gods playing the other side of the coin versus last year. And that's not to give them a free pass, but if you think about, what they lost in the offseason, James Neal, David Perron, they were replaced by Max Pacioretty and Paul Stastny, and they haven't been there. So the depth just goes straight down the tube. William Karlsson with his crazy 43-goal season last year, come back down to earth, and maybe a little bit of a thud there. I think that he probably deserves more than I believe he has 3 goals or 4 goals right now. And that defense without Schmidt, as I mentioned, it's impacted in such a negative way. Nick Holden hasn't turned out to be much of a player.
I mean, I could have told you that.
No, I know it's not a huge surprise, but you know what I mean. Like these sort of plugins or these holes that they tried to plug, I should say, are still leaking. So the thing with the Golden Knights, and this was true last year and it's true this year, is Marc-Andre Fleury kind of has to stand on his head if this team wants to be a contender. I think that they can still make the playoffs even with this bad start, and even with last year seeming like something that came out of nowhere. I think, on paper, given who they have on their roster, and what we saw last year out of a lot of players that didn't get their opportunity, I think that they can make the playoffs. They have an uphill battle now, given what they've done in the first, about 20% of the season. But I mean, the way that I see it is the Pacific Division is a bit of a gong show. You have the San Jose Sharks, who may go through a rough patch here and there throughout the season, but they're going to probably win that division, if not second or third. They're making the playoffs, obviously. The Calgary Flames, I think, have enough talent to make the playoffs, and we'll be fine. After that, though, it's a bit of a toss-up. I think Vegas is probably my number 3 because I do not trust the LA Kings, and they're showing it right now, being last in the league. The Anaheim Ducks are a disaster. Night after night, they're getting outshot horrendously, and there's injuries galore there. Edmonton, aside from Connor McDavid, and that's just not happening. And I don't know. I don't have any confidence in them. So you go up and down the list in the Pacific Division, and I still believe in Vegas. Do I think that that they'll even win a round this year? I don't know, but I still think that they have a good chance to make the playoffs, even if you're just considering the Pacific Division and the 3 spots that they have to fill there. So, I mean, Vegas is sort of what it is at this point. It would have been better for us, people like us, to analyze them at this point in the season. If they had been healthy, we would have had a nice chunk of games to see if things had changed over last year. But I just feel like you have to at least consider the way that their roster's been disrupted. And, I guess talk to me in a month or two and I'll probably have a better opinion.
For sure. Well, Max Pacioretty, the star player who was acquired from the Canadiens in the offseason, who I thought Vegas won this deal, but I mean, he's got 2 goals in 14 games with them, no assist. He hasn't been playing well. Meanwhile, Tatar, out of nowhere, seemingly has 15 points in 18 games with the Canadiens. I mean, this is the same guy who had 28 points in 62 games with the Red Wings last year, then got traded to the Golden Knights, did not find his niche, did not perform well, only 6 points in 20 regular season games with the Golden Knights, and then was healthy scratched for a lot of the playoffs as well, only a goal and an assist in 8 playoff games, and then went to Montreal, and now he's almost a point-a-game player. Meanwhile, Pacioretty is having a huge slump, another one, after he scored 67 points in the 16-17 season, then dropped significantly to 37 last season, and now he only has 2 goals and no assists in 14 games. So I don't know what's going on with Max Pacioretty. And by the way, James Neal, who had 44 points last season with the Knights, has 3 goals and an assist with the Calgary Flames in 18 games. So a lot of these players that have left old homes and have found new ones aren't playing well, besides Tatar and Max Domi for some reason. Max Domi had 9 goals last year, and now he can't stop scoring. The Montreal Canadiens won this trade as of November 14th. We'll see down the road, but the Golden Knights are you're right on that front where they Carlson isn't scoring at a tremendous rate as he was. James Neal, he's no longer on the team, even though he's not performing well this season. Pacioretty isn't meeting expectations. This team has a problem with filling those scoring gaps. Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up the Pacioretty trade because you almost forget your initial reaction to that. And if I remember back, when you were talking there, I'm like, how did I view that trade? And it was like, the major piece to me going to Montreal was Nick Suzuki. It was like, whoa, Vegas, you're really kind of mortgaging the future here. I realize you want Pacioretty and you want to seize the moment with the momentum you built in your first season, but take it easy on one of your top prospects going out the door. So Tatar, the stock couldn't have been any lower this offseason, and then he gets traded, and it's quite a mystery why things didn't work out for him in Vegas last year. Especially because I was always a huge fan of him in Detroit. I know he battled injuries, and I know that he had his up and down years, but when he broke into the league, I really thought he was going to be something special. So it's nice to see Tatar take off. And you also mentioned in passing Max Domi. That's another one that's boggling the mind. And it's so cliche and it's so it seems like something that you just say, but
it turns out that a change of scenery was exactly what Max Domi needed. And I actually used to cover him when he was in junior with the London Knights, and he had this like magnetic personality and this energy to him. And when he skated up the ice, there was like kind of like a hop in his step and a lot of swagger, and like that's finally back. It's been, I don't know how many years he's been in the league, 3 or 4. Like you didn't see that in Arizona, so I wonder if he wants the big lights, and the big city and the spotlight, because in junior hockey, the London Knights is kind of like, I don't know if it's the Montreal Canadiens, but it's like the Toronto Maple Leafs of the OHL. So I don't know, like it's weird and it shouldn't be a factor, but maybe that's as simple as it is with Max Domi. He's in a place where a lot of eyes are on him, and he seems to excel under those circumstances, and he's playing center, and the coach is letting him kind of do what he wants, and he's skating with confidence. Like, it's just one of those things where it seems so cliche, but the change of scenery, it's really helping Max Domi.
How much is a quote-unquote change of scenery a cliche and just, kind of just untrue, but we pretend that it's true? And how much is it actually, mentally and physically a part of a player that wants a second opportunity playing for a different team? Because we've seen this time and time again in all major sports. Oh, he just needs a change of scenery. Oh, he just needs a new team to play for. And sometimes it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. How much of that is just psychological? Just kind of like, oh, we're making this up, and how much is it? This is actually a real thing that impacts players that want a second chance at things from a different perspective.
I mean, I'm not a psychologist,
right? For sure.
I'm not going to pretend to know what's going on between.
We only play one on TV.
Exactly, and so yeah, I'm kind of torn with this type of subject because I try not to, just spout these platitudes that have been out there for years and are just kind of fallback reasoning for things. But like, I don't know. You're human. I'm human. So is a hockey player, right? If you get into a new job, situation, a new school, a new class, like you might feel a little rejuvenated, right? Like maybe you're hanging out with people you don't know, and you're kind of like you're being more yourself, maybe because when you're around people that you've known for a long time, you sort of have this like aura to you that you just don't like because of the setting and the environment and the vibes from everyone else. Like I believe in it, like in a sense that like under the right circumstances, I think that it can be a positive development in someone's life. Like it's like even Max Pacioretty, he wanted to get out of Montreal because he was a punching bag. He was every night he had to answer to the press, and that's just not him. I think he's revered as a good leader, as a lead by example guy, as a really good person. But is he the guy that can handle being asked questions when they lose every time, being asked questions when they win every time, and just being like the face, being on the billboards and everything? It sounds like it isn't. And when you talk to him now, he's like, even though I'm not producing, I'm enjoying myself in Vegas because I can walk around. No one knows who I am. Even my dealings with the press is more sort of cordial and less, antagonistic. So I don't know. I think it's more of a personality thing. I don't know how much it, and obviously that bleeds into the on ice play, but I think it's more like your headspace and sometimes you're just in a bad situation and sort of your wires are all crossed, and it's just nice to get away and start new.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, again, we're not psychologists. We only pretend to be one on TV occasionally from time to time. So it is tough to gauge that sort of side of professional sports. But I totally see where you're coming from. The Metropolitan Division and the Atlantic Division, for by extension as well, there are some crazy things going on in both divisions and just the Eastern Conference as a whole. I mean, you got the Sabres, who are 10-6-2, won 3 in a row. They won last night against one of the best teams in the league, 2-1, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they look good doing it, which is a pleasant surprise for Sabres fans, for hockey fans, for everyone involved, because Buffalo has been so bad for so long, and there's a question of how long it's going to stick, but for now, Buffalo Sabres looking pretty solid. My question for the Sabres is their goaltending, because I'm not quite sold on Ben Hutton's ability to play well consistently and be an actual starter for the Sabres. Because again, while the Sabres are obviously, exponentially improved from even last season, Ben Hutton, in my mind, needs a great blue line in order to be great for the most part. But for right now, Ben Hutton is looking pretty good. But my question is, how long can he keep that up? And how long can the Sabres keep this up? Because they won 3 in a row. They're 6-2-2 in the last 10 games. Out of nowhere, they obviously have improved. And I've said this before. They might be, I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs, but they are much better than they were before. They're not going to be dead last. They're not going to be second dead last. They're not going to have a top 5 pick in this draft. Probably. I mean, for Sabres' sake, I would hope so. I would hope that they won't be a top 5 pick in the draft again this year. But what have you seen out of the Sabres so far? They have looked very good in certain spots, but again, they are the Buffalo Sabres, so I'm hesitant to be, kind of on the. I'm hesitant to jump on that bandwagon right now, only because it's still a young team. The goaltending is kind of shaky. I mean, what do you think about the Sabres so far?
Yeah, no, the timeline for the Sabres is a couple of years.
Right.
If I don't think they're going to make the playoffs this year. I think that, well, first of all, the bar was really low, and I think they're going to jump over it easily in terms of improvement based on points and just, night to night performances. I've seen them a couple times live, and I've talked to a few of the players early going in the season, and I'll say a few things. So, number one, Rasmus Dalene has been fantastic. He's kind of flown under the radar. He's come in there as an 18-year-old defenseman, which is super rare. I believe it's just Aaron Ekblad and Jacob Chychrun that have gone straight from the draft as an 18-year-old to the NHL and actually played more than 10 games or whatever in the salary cap era. So he's already in this tiny pool. He's being moved around within the defense group constantly, and it's a credit to him. It's more of a slag on his actual teammates because, for example, Jake McCabe. I always screw up his name. I don't know why. Jake McCabe. I swear it's in my head. And anyways, so they were playing together at the start of the season, and Steve Smith, the assistant coach there, wanted to put Dalene on the right side because Jake McCabe just couldn't figure out playing on the right side. And then Dalene goes there. McCabe's game takes off. Dalene's already so far ahead of even his teammates that have been in the league for 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years. Marco Scandella is one of his teammates. He's been around for a while. So that's one thing. Dalene and Rasmus Ristolainen are a nice 1-2 punch. The rest of the defense is a complete work in progress. And that's, like you said with Hutton, this guy needs support. No one's joking, or no one's convincing themselves that Ben Hutton is the answer here, or Carter Hutton. Sorry, I'm getting my Huttons mixed up. But anyways, where was I? So yeah, the defense, total work in progress, but Dalene, bright spot, and Ristolainen finally isn't the guy shouldering the entire load. Another thing is Jeff Skinner's transitioned nicely. Jason Pominville also on his line with Jack Eichel. That's been a nice trio, sort of 3 guys at different points in their career. Jeff Skinner kind of right in the middle of it, coming over obviously from Carolina, getting a chance to spread his wings a little bit more with a team that has some more high-end finishers and just guys to play with. Carolina's been a bit of a wasteland for years. And then Jason Pominville reviving his career, playing with a guy like Eichel, assuming the net front presence that every line seems to need. And they've got a couple other guys contributing. So I just think that Buffalo is and I think they know it too. I think internally it's pretty obvious that they're not walking around thinking that they're going to win the division. I think it's an incremental gains type of movement there. And I think that if they can, survive the season 500 and see a nice gap between the points that they accrue this year and what they finished with last year, that's a gigantic step forward. Because you mentioned it, that franchise has gone through a lot, and a lot of it's self-inflicted and whatnot. And there's been a lot of bad body language from Jack Eichel and just experiments gone wrong, left, right, and center. But here they are having fun. It's kind of nice to see. I grew up in between Toronto and Buffalo, so I kind of got both sides of the coin there in terms of coverage and success and failure. And like Buffalo just hasn't had a grain of success for, I don't know, the last 5-10 years. So it's nice to see them moving in the right direction for once.
I mean, you're absolutely right. The Buffalo Sabres have been a dumpster fire for, the better part of this decade, and now they're finally above water. They're holding on tight right now to a 10-6 record. I mean, they've even compared to last year, they are a much improved team on the ice. They look better, whether it's during a game or even after a game or whatever. They look like they're a much better, I don't want to say a well-oiled machine just yet, because like you said, they are still a work in progress, but they are a better oiled machine than they were previously. And you mentioned Jakob Chychrun, who yesterday, before playing his first game of the season, the same day, he got a 6-year deal for $4.6 million deal per season. Take me through what you think about Chychrun's game. He played 2 seasons prior to this one, 68 games in his rookie year in 16-17, 20 points, and then in 17-18, 50 games with 14 points. So he's yet to play a full season in the league, but yet the Coyotes feel strongly about him, strongly enough to give him a long, lengthy contract like that. What do you see out of Chychrun's game that perhaps the basic stats aren't showing, and perhaps those that don't necessarily know a whole lot about the ins and outs of the Arizona Coyotes, what have you seen out of Jakob Chychrun that suggests that he deserves that contract?
Well, first of all, like John Chayka is taking an approach that's interesting. Is like, between the Chychrun deal and the Christian Dvorak deal, he's basically taken 2 guys that he says, I want them to be part of my core as we, slowly move towards relevance. These guys are going to be part of the solution, and he's identified it early, and he's betting on them to an extent, but he's getting them at a good AAV. And if he's confident in Chychrun, he's confident in Dvorak, then those he's going to be laughing at those contracts in a couple of years. So that's one thing where there's a definite pattern there where Chayka is going out on a limb, so to speak, a little bit, but at the same time, I think that the Coyotes organization is big on sports science, big on obviously analytics as Chayka is known for, but they're very process oriented, and if they can line up X, Y, and Z for the next 6 years, then that's sort of it's sort of some nice tidy business, and they can move on with their lives. And with Chychrun specifically, the guy's an absolute beast of an athlete. That's something that sticks out initially. And also, he was I think people forget that this guy was, like, I guess 3 years ago now, was heading into his draft year, was considered the number 2 prospect. Like, he was very highly touted. Fell off the map a little bit towards the draft, and that's why he fell to Arizona when they ended up trading up to acquire him or to pick him, I should say. And a part of that was his hockey sense. People were a little concerned, I guess by people, I mean scouts. Scouts were a little concerned in his draft year that, say it's a loose puck, he picks it up, he's making the wrong decision. He's going, to the left instead of the right because, and he's going into traffic instead of, going up the ice kind of by himself. You know what I mean? Like, just making these split-second decisions that are wrong versus, here's door A, here's door B, and he chooses the wrong door. So that was a concern. And the thing about that was that it was only in his draft year, right? Like, before that, he was this highly touted guy. Hockey sense was not a problem. But scouts saw it time and again in his draft year. And I think that since then, since he's been drafted, he's cleaned that up where I don't know if he felt pressured in his draft year. I don't know what it was, but the hockey sense thing, while not maybe his strongest skill, it's fine. So I think that we're, give this 5 years or so, and 1, Chychrun will be a deal for the Coyotes, and 2, I think he's going to be on their top pair. I don't know if he's going to play with Ekman-Larsson or if they're going to be split up, but like those 2 guys are going to be around for a long time with this organization and be sort of the leaders of that defense corps that's already pretty good. They have Demers there, Goligoski. Like that's another thing about Chaika is he's building from the defense out, which is interesting. They've got some entry level deals coming up on forward, so we'll see if that changes. And if it was just a coincidence that he was building from the D out, that the actual contracts were just coming up on that position. But also another thing to watch out for is their love of defensemen and locking them up.
Yeah, I mean, Jake Chychrun, as you mentioned, 16th overall pick in 2016. The Coyotes obviously super high on him because he played. I mean, that season he was already up for the Coyotes, and not only did he just play, I mean, he played the majority, almost the entire season for them. So the Coyotes are very clearly they love him, and $4.6 million sounds like a chunk of money right now because again he hasn't played a whole season yet. But Jakob Chychrun is the 16th overall pick in the 2016 draft here. I mean, this is a very talented defenseman, and I'm very glad that you say that because not everyone knows who this person is because again he's on Arizona and he's not on the Leafs or he's not on the Habs or he's not on the Bruins. So therefore, not every single hockey fan is going to know who he is. But in 4 or 5 years' time, this is going to be a top 2 defenseman, and I absolutely agree with you on that. And the Arizona Coyotes right now have around $8.3 million in cap space, which is going to be higher because the cap ceiling is going to increase, and then Mike Smith salary retention is he has $1.4 million on the books for the Coyotes that ends this season, so that's going to come off the books. They're going to have more room to work with as well, and the Coyotes might just splash for a big forward, big name to fill out their top line or the top 2 lines or whatever, and really make a push for not only the playoffs but beyond. I mean, you said it. Their blue line is either going to be really good or is about to be really good, and their offense is getting there. They still have some holes, but if they start filling out some of these offensive holes that they've got, watch out for the Arizona Coyotes. They have Antti Raanta, who's currently on IR, but he's been fantastic for them. That blue line is going to be very soon, or they're knocking on greatness's door right now. And you have a lot of names in the 2019 NHL free agents list that they might go for, like a Mark Stone or a Duchesne or an Eberle, that they might acquire and do damage next season. Are they going to make the playoffs this season? I said no earlier. They might cap at around 85, 87 points. They're going to be close, but I think next season, if they get one of those top names, they will do a whole lot of damage.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that high on them. Like, I think that they're going in the right direction. I don't know if I want to compare them to Buffalo, but they're sort of like in the same spot in terms of, timeline. I think that, give it, maybe they can make the playoffs next year, but I'm not, I think that they're building something, and I think that there's, potential there, but there's also potential in a lot of places. So I don't know if I'm jumping on the bandwagon yet, but I do like what they're doing, and I think that Antti Raanta, was a massive coup for them, picking him up and sort of unearthing him because, it wasn't that long ago that he was a backup, and although he had good numbers, he was just a backup. So they took a chance on him. And that works out. And then we'll see, right? The Alex Galchenyuk-Max Domi trade was almost unanimously considered a win for the Coyotes. So, Galchenyuk was hurt for a bit. He's coming along now and he's playing. And I wonder if long term that ends up being a fantastic piece for them. Or, I don't know, who knows, right? It's almost the opposite of Max Domi. It sounds like Galchenyuk would actually prefer to be in a smaller market. So the Coyotes, work in progress, but I think that they're getting there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there. I am a little higher on the Coyotes from what it sounds like than you are, but again, a lot of their roster is super young. They have 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds that are only going to get better from here on out. And Antti Raanta, by the way, I mean, Rangers fans at the time really, really disliked the trade because we were very high on Stepan, very high on Raanta. We knew he was going to be. We as soon as we got him, and as soon as I mean, you know, the fan base saw the way Raanta played, and the fan base was very high on him, and the Rangers and the Coyotes both won in different ways. The Coyotes obviously got Derek Stepan and they got a starting goaltender. Meanwhile, the Rangers got a very solid defenseman, Tony DeAngelo, who's kind of came into his own so far this season. He was kind of up and down last season, and a lot of question marks were starting to be raised here. But this season so far, Tony DeAngelo has looked very good, and they also got Elias Anderson, who is a top 7. He was drafted 7th overall. So and Rangers are obviously very high on him as well. So for now, it looks like it's worked out for both teams. Obviously, time will tell later down the road to see who won and this and that and the logistics of this trade. But from what it looks like right now, both teams won in different situations because Stepan, while a great player, didn't really help the Rangers out much right now because the Rangers are rebuilding. Meanwhile, Derek Stepan is a great player and deserves to be playing somewhere else, and that somewhere else is Arizona. And Antti Raanta, of course, too good to be the backup to Henrik Lundqvist, so now he's the starting goaltender in Arizona, even though he is on IR right now, and Darcy Kemper is leading the way for the Coyotes right now. But, John, this was awesome. I mean, I really, really do appreciate you coming on, taking the time out to talk to me about hockey. Tell people where they can follow you, where they can read your stuff. And I really appreciate you coming on.
Hey, no problem. I guess the best bet would be to follow me on Twitter. It's MATISZJOHN, Matisz John. No space there. And I'm in the SCORE app and also TheScore.com. So those are 3 places that you can find my work if you're interested.
Awesome. John, you're the best. I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk hockey with me. And I'll talk to you again real soon.
No problem. Enjoy.
Absolutely. And that was John Matisz from TheScore. And as always, I'm Andrew Chelney. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please share it. Please leave a rating. And I'll talk to you again next week.